And this is a story my uncle used to tell me when I was a kid. He swears it really happened to him and his best friend Mark when they were teenagers, back in the late 80s. They used to go camping every summer in Pennsylvania at Allegheny National Forest. If you've ever been out there, you know it's massive. Miles and miles of thick pine and hardwood forest, old logging trails that go nowhere, and almost no one else around. Even now, cell service barely works there. Back then, they were completely cut off. And that's exactly what they loved. No noise, no rules, no one telling them when to be home. This particular trip was in late August. It was one of those stretches where the days are still warm and a little muggy, but at night you feel that first hint of fall creeping in. My uncle said they set up in a clearing near a small creek where they'd always fish. They spent that first day fishing, talking about girls, tossing stones across the water. Mark kept bragging about a new cassette tape he'd picked up, and my uncle teased him for bringing it when they didn't even have a player. Just dumb teenage stuff. When the sun started to set, they got a fire going and cooked up some fish with a few cans of beans. They sat up for a while after dark, just listening to the forest. My uncle always says the forest at night is a different world. All those daytime noises, birds, bugs, wind, and the leaves, they seem to melt into this heavy, thick silence, broken only by an occasional twig snap or distant owl. Mark started getting jumpy, saying he heard someone walking around the edge of the clearing. My uncle tried to joke that it was probably Bigfoot or a lost park ranger, but Mark wasn't laughing. He swore the footsteps were deliberate, slow, like someone taking their time circling them. They eventually crawled into their tent. Mark claimed he didn't sleep at all that night. Every time my uncle would start snoring, Mark would hear rustling, heavy breathing, or faint snapping sounds, just beyond the thin fabric of the tent. But my uncle was out cold most of the night. In the morning, Mark offered to get firewood, while my uncle stayed to prep some oatmeal and boil water for instant coffee. After a few minutes, Mark says he suddenly heard my uncle yelling his name from deeper in the woods. Mark said the voice sounded strained, like my uncle was hurt or panicking. He said he didn't even think twice. He dropped the armload of sticks and bolted toward the sound, calling back, trying to figure out where he was. Mark told me it felt like the voice kept moving. He'd get close, then it would echo farther away, almost like it was purposely dragging him deeper. The farther he went, the more the underbrush seemed to close in around him. He realized at some point that he was no longer on any recognizable trail. He described the sinking feeling in his stomach, like he had been tricked. Mark said he finally stopped running when he felt completely turned around. That's when he noticed a thin line of smoke rising above the trees. It was from their campfire. He fixated on that smoke, like it was a lifeline, and started bushwhacking back, ignoring the voice that he said was still calling, but now sounding farther off and weirdly distorted, like a bad recording. Meanwhile, my uncle was back at the camp, calling out for Mark. He had no idea what had happened. He started thinking maybe a bear had gotten Mark, or he'd fallen and hurt himself. When Mark finally stumbled into the clearing, he looked like he'd seen a ghost, pale, sweaty, shaking all over. He started yelling at my uncle, asking why he was playing such a cruel joke. My uncle had no clue what he meant. He swore he never called out at all. He hadn't even left the fire. They argued for hours that day. Mark was furious, on the verge of tears, convinced my uncle had let him out there to scare him or get him lost. My uncle kept saying he wouldn't do something like that he didn't even know where Mark went. By late afternoon, they had calmed down enough to eat something, but Mark refused to leave the clearing again. He just sat by the fire, staring into the trees like he expected something to come out at any moment. That night, they decided to stay up and keep the fire going. They sat back to back so nothing could sneak up on them. Around midnight, they started hearing it again, voices drifting through the trees. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. They both heard what sounded like their own voices, overlapping each other, calling their names. Mark said the voices were all wrong, like someone trying to imitate them but missing the emotion, flattening the tone, almost robotic. My uncle wanted to grab the flashlight and go figure out what it was. He thought maybe some other campers were lost or maybe kids messing with them. But Mark practically begged him not to go. He said his gut told him that if they followed those voices, they wouldn't come back. My uncle argued, at first saying they couldn't just leave if someone needed help. But Mark was insistent, almost in tears, saying he knew it wasn't a person out there, not really. Finally, my uncle gave in. They decided to pack up right then and there, throwing all their gear into their bags without folding or organizing anything. They left stuff behind, a pot, some extra food, even Mark's new cassette tape. They just wanted to get out. My uncle said the walk back to the car felt like it took hours, even though it should have been less than an hour. Every few minutes, they thought they heard footsteps behind them or something breaking branches off to the side of the trail. They didn't stop or look back once. When they finally got to the car, they jumped in and drove without saying a word. Mark didn't go camping again after that. My uncle still camps, but only at busy campgrounds with lots of people nearby. He doesn't often talk about that trip anymore. But every once in a while, if we're sitting out by a fire, he'll get real quiet, stare into the tree line, and tilt his head like he's listening for something. And I know exactly what he's thinking about. I don't know what was out there with them or what was copying their voices, but ever since I heard that story, I've never gone camping without at least one other person. And I always listen carefully before following any voice in the woods. This is a story my coworker shared with me a few years ago. It's about her cousin Jake. She told me it happened when he was in his early 20s, and after it happened, he started talking about it all the time. She said it was like he needed to get it out of his system, even if no one wanted to hear it. Jake was a long-distance runner, really into those ultra marathons where you run 50 or even 100 miles through mountains and forests. He loved pushing himself, being alone in nature, just him and the trail. In the fall of 2014, he decided to take a weekend trip to Olympic National Park in Washington State to train. That park is massive. Thick old-growth forest, moss hanging from trees like curtains, and fog that rolls in so heavy it can swallow you up. It's beautiful, but easy to get lost in if you're not careful. Jake planned a loop trail, about 30 miles total. He'd run in about 15 miles the first day, set up a small camp overnight, then finish the loop the next day. He let his family know exactly where he'd be and when he planned to come back. He was always careful that way, at least in the beginning. The first day went fine. He made good time, enjoyed the views, and set up his camp next to a small stream. That night, he felt completely at peace, the kind of deep, quiet peace that only happens out in the woods. He cooked a simple dinner on his little camp stove, listened to the water, and fell asleep under a sky full of stars. The next morning, everything changed. When he woke up, there was a thick fog blanketing the forest. He described it like waking up inside a cloud, so dense he could barely see 10 feet ahead. He figured it would lift as the sun rose higher, so he packed up and started jogging slowly along the trail. But the fog didn't clear. In fact, it seemed to get thicker the farther he went. The bright orange trail markers that had been so easy to spot the day before were now hidden, blending into the gray-white wall around him. At some point, he thought he saw a faint side trail branching off to the right. He decided to take it, thinking it would reconnect with the main loop and save him time. He told my coworker he regretted that choice immediately, but kept going because he didn't want to admit to himself that he'd messed up. Runners sometimes call it tunnel vision, when you get so focused on moving forward that you stop thinking clearly. After an hour or so, he realized he hadn't seen a single marker, and the trail didn't look maintained anymore. That prickling feeling started on the back of his neck, like he was being watched. He kept hearing soft noises behind him, light footfalls, twigs snapping, and sometimes what sounded like a low, distant voice. Every time he turned to look, the fog just swallowed everything up. No movement, no shapes, just that thick, endless gray. Trying not to panic, he started marking trees with little slashes from his pocket knife, so he could tell if he was going in circles. But after another hour, he started seeing his own marks ahead of him, on trees he hadn't even reached yet. That's when he realized he might really be lost. He tried to stop and eat, check his compass, calm down. But the compass needle wouldn't settle. It just spun, like it was confused or broken. That's when he started to really lose it. He said the fog started to feel alive, almost like it was pressing in around him, tightening every time he stopped moving. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of his vision, shapes that vanished when he tried to focus on them. He started running, not toward anything, just away from the feeling. He fell more than once, scraped his arms and legs, tore his running shirt. His water ran out. He tried drinking from little streams, but the water tasted metallic and made him gag. At one point, he sat on a mossy rock to catch his breath and thought he saw a tall, thin figure standing between two trees ahead of him, completely still. When he blinked, it was gone. That was the moment he said he really broke down. He started sobbing, screaming for help, but it felt like the forest swallowed his voice. He said it was like yelling underwater, muffled, pointless. That night, he curled up at the base of a huge cedar tree. He didn't even bother setting up any shelter, just wrapped his arms around his knees and tried to stay warm. He said he heard slow, steady footsteps circling him all night. Sometimes they stopped, sometimes they sped up, but they never came closer. He was too weak to run anymore, so he just lay there, shaking and drifting in and out of sleep. The next morning, the fog finally started to lift. Weak and dizzy, he forced himself to start walking again, thinking maybe he could hear someone or find a trail. Around noon, he heard voices and saw flashes of bright jackets. It was a search and rescue team. They said he was about 8 miles off any marked trail, completely dehydrated and covered in cuts and bruises. They had been searching for 2 days after his family reported him overdue. When they got him back to town, he wouldn't say much at first, but over time, he started talking about it more and more, almost like he needed to get it out. He shared it with his running groups, people at the gym, even random strangers who asked about trail running. The one thing he always said the same way was, "I wasn't alone out there." When people asked what he meant, did he see another hiker, an animal, someone following him? He would just shake his head and say, "There was something else moving with me. That's all I know." After that, he quit running trails in the forest. He still runs, but only on open, well-marked race courses with lots of people around. My coworker said he talks about that trip more than anyone wants to hear it, like he's trying to warn people without even fully knowing what he's warning them about. Even now, she says sometimes he wakes up in the middle of the night soaked in sweat, staring at the floor like he's listening for something only he can hear. I don't know what Jake saw or heard out there. Maybe it was just the fog and exhaustion playing tricks on him. But sometimes, when I think about his story, I wonder how easy it would be to step off the trail and never come back. And I wonder if maybe there really is something else out there, moving through the fog, waiting for us to take just one wrong turn. This is a story my old neighbor shared with me a few years back. She told me it happened to her older brother Ben when he was in high school. She swears it changed him forever. Ben and two of his buddies decided to skip school one day in early spring. They lived in a small town in Vermont, surrounded by thick forest. The plan was to hike out to this old fire tower deep in the woods. There's a local legend that if you climb it, you can see all the way across the state on a clear day. They didn't really care about the view. They just wanted an excuse to be out in the woods, mess around, maybe smoke a bit, and feel like rebels for a day. That morning was chilly but sunny, with just a little leftover snow clinging to the shady spots and muddy ground everywhere else. They started on a marked trail, joking around and tossing sticks at each other. At some point, one of the guys suggested they take a shortcut straight through the woods, instead of following the winding trail. Ben was usually cautious, but that day he didn't want to look scared in front of his friends. So they all agreed and stepped off the path. It didn't take long for them to realize they had no idea where they were. The woods got thicker, the ground muddier, and the trees all started to look the same. They kept trying to find landmarks, but every rock and fallen log seemed to blur together. Then, like it was out of nowhere, it started to rain. Not just a light drizzle, a cold, hard spring rain that soaked them in minutes. The temperature dropped fast, and they started shivering and slipping in the mud. That's when they spotted it. An old cabin tucked back between a few pine trees, almost hidden. It looked abandoned. The roof sagged, the windows were dark and empty, and moss had started to creep up the sides. Desperate to get out of the rain, they sprinted over and ducked inside without thinking twice. Inside, it was even colder, but at least they were out of the downpour. The cabin smelled like old wood and wet earth. There was broken furniture scattered around, a half-burned mattress in the corner, and odd carvings all over the walls. Shapes and symbols they didn't recognize. There were also old candle stubs on the floor. Wax melted into strange puddles, as if someone had used the place for something at some point. At first, they were too busy catching their breath to really take in how weird the place felt. Then Ben suddenly went quiet. He was standing near the middle of the room, staring at one of the carvings. His friends thought maybe he was just freaked out by the symbols, but then he said he didn't feel right. He couldn't explain it. He just kept saying, "Something is wrong. I don't feel good. We shouldn't be here." A minute later, he doubled over, clutching his head. He started saying his head felt like it was going to explode, that it was the worst pain he'd ever felt. His friends panicked. One of them tried to help him stand, but he was trembling so badly he could barely stay upright. They thought he might be having a seizure or some kind of sudden illness. So they decided they had to get him out and find help immediately. As soon as they stepped out of the cabin, everything changed. Ben straightened up, stopped shaking, and took a deep breath. The headache vanished almost instantly. He looked around confused, like he wasn't sure what had just happened. His friends were still terrified, but they were relieved to see him coming back to himself. They didn't waste any more time. They just started moving, trying to find any trail or landmark to lead them back. They finally stumbled onto a trail around dusk, muddy and exhausted, but they managed to make it back to the parking area just as the last bit of light was fading. They didn't say much on the drive home. Ben stared out the window the whole time, rubbing his forehead like he was trying to make sense of what had happened. After that day, Ben changed. He started having sleepwalking episodes. His sister said they'd find him standing at the back door in the middle of the night, just staring out at the woods behind their house like he was listening for something. He completely stopped going into the woods after that. He wouldn't even join short family walks in the local park if there were trees nearby. When people asked him exactly what had happened in that cabin, all he would say was, "We weren't supposed to be there." He never explained what he meant or what he thought might have really happened. He doesn't really like talking about it now. But when he does, you can tell he's remembering something he wishes he could forget. I don't know what was in that cabin or why it affected him so strongly. Maybe it was something in the air, some mold or chemicals that messed with his head. Or maybe it was something we just aren't meant to understand. But every time I hear about someone leaving the trail to take a shortcut, I think of Ben. And I hope they don't find something they weren't meant to see.